Let's bring in our Oubai Shahbandar now. Oubai, we've just heard from the Israeli government. They're taking a very hard line on this. Tell me why.
Well, this is the largest such demonstration in Gaza in recent memory. The Palestinians are referring to it as March of Return. Some are even referring to it as a Passover uprising. So it's interesting to see here that the Israeli Defense Forces are, as you said, are taking a very hard line here. Around 18 have been killed. Now, the Israelis are saying that most of those are either militants or directly threatened Israeli soldiers, or the wall that they've set up to essentially encompass and close off Gaza. The Palestinians are saying that most of those have been killed were merely demonstrators, youth. They were just throwing rocks, some Molotov cocktails, but they never put the Israeli military in direct danger. The Israelis, as you said, are not backing down. This is potentially a PR disaster for Israel, as many in Israel itself are taken aback at the reaction by government forces against the demonstrators, especially with some of the harrowing footage that we're seeing coming out of those protests that are more than likely going to continue.
And it could be both, in the sense that Hamas, of course, could be instigating things, but that doesn't mean that the people who are being killed are not peaceful protesters, right?
Indeed. Now, Hamas has acknowledged that at least 5 members of its military wing were amongst those that were killed. But overall, if you look at the mass of the protesters that are there, they're demonstrating in just wide open field. It's wide open. There's no cover. You can clearly see who is armed, who is not armed. Most of those protesters were just burning tires and simply or throwing rocks. But the response was from the very beginning. In fact, before the demonstrations began, the IDF declared that they were going to use live fire. So it was clear that there was a existing intent by the IDF to use maximum force against these demonstrations.
Yeah, on the left in Israel, Gideon Levy writing in Haaretz saying tanks and sharpshooters against unarmed civilians. That's called a massacre. There's no other word for it. That's on the Israeli left. He's an unpopular man in Israel at the moment and swims against the tide when it comes to a lot of what the army does. Jerusalem Post with an op-ed. They're on the right and I guess pro-government. They're saying Hamas is using the demonstrations to undermine and delegitimize Israel. It doesn't want its people to have hope for a better future. The last line is the most fascinating. It prefers they be shot and killed by Israelis. This narrative that the Palestinians are sort of coming towards the Israeli army and wanting to be killed like zombies, if you like. Tell me how prevalent that is.
Look, when people have no hope left, then they have nothing to lose. And that's exactly what the situation in Gaza is like today. When we speak to activists, when we speak to civilians and students in Gaza, the same narrative is heard over and over and over again: is we have no hope, we're enclosed, we can't leave, we can't have a chance for a normal life. So when you give people no hope for a better future, then they have nothing to lose. And that's the worst case scenario for the Israelis, when you have a population of millions in a densely populated area, one of the most densely populated in the world, essentially losing hope because of the blockade that the Israeli government has instituted against the people of Gaza. Now, at the end of the day, the Israeli military is going to win any direct confrontation with Hamas in Gaza. But it's Hamas a battle of public opinion and international
Hamas is not
opinion.
fighting them now, is it? I mean, they're claiming it's asymmetric, right? But it's, I mean, you spoke about that border. It's like a couple kilometers and then a fence and a couple kilometers, and you have snipers and soldiers and stuff there. Like, there's no direct conflict in terms of Hamas and the Israelis right now. But they're still calling it a conflict with Hamas. For how long will their allies, for example, the United States and others, accept that narrative?
Well, I think if we see continued days of the footage that we're seeing that came out over this weekend of youth being shot and killed, of innocent protesters being shot and killed, it's not going to be a winnable solution for the Israelis. It's just not sustainable. And I think that's ultimately what the strategy is here by Hamas, is that they know they can't win against Israel in any direct confrontation, but if they're able to rally the masses, where we're seeing just a mass of people at the border protesting, calling for to live a normal life in Gaza. These are images that the Israelis, at the end of the day, they cannot win this war public of international opinion. Now, if we're seeing, if the casualty numbers significantly increase and spike, again, this is something that the Israelis are going to find themselves in a lose-lose situation. We're already seeing some protests in Israel against these actions. But at the end of the day, it's going to be the Palestinian people that are going to suffer one way or another. But many of the Palestinians that we're speaking with tell us, well, we have nothing left to lose, so why not?
Given that the Israelis have killed at least 17 of the protesters, and even though I guess, what, 5 have been Qassam brigades members, and we have had hundreds of civilians injured. Given that it's happened, is there an argument to be made that Hamas is being reckless by encouraging people to go forward because they know they're going to be shot by the Israelis?
Well, the intent by the Israeli forces was clear from the very beginning. They made it very clear to everyone that they were going to use live ammunition. Hamas knew that. The organizers of these protests knew that. But what happened at the end of the day here is that the people had nothing left to lose. When you can't, force people by the hundreds to protest, if at the end of the day, well, some may actually prefer death or even the potential of dying or being shot by the Israelis rather than living a life without dignity. And so this was a very easy move, a decision by Hamas to make against the Israelis.
Yeah, terrible situation in Gaza in terms of living conditions and so on. We were there last year. From the Palestinian perspective, if they go, well, if we fire rockets and we are violent, you ask, where's the Palestinian Mandela? Where are your peaceful protests? Now, they are peaceful protests, by and large, and they're still being labeled as terrorism by the Israelis.
Terrorists and rioters. So it's interesting to see the narrative that's being used by the Israelis.
So what does that do in terms of, from the Palestinian perspective? Well, clearly, they don't feel the other side has any semblance of good faith, because even when we're protesting largely peacefully, you're picking us off and you're calling us terrorists.
Well, then you make a popular and perhaps a violent uprising inevitable. And that's a lose-lose situation for the Israelis when you're leaving no other recourse for the people to claim their rights, to claim their dignity. And that's a situation that the Israelis may ultimately face themselves with if they don't offer the millions of Gazans and Palestinians an opportunity to live a normal life. And in fact, so what's happening here, even if the Palestinian protesters don't support Hamas or they don't support Hamas's agenda or political ideology, they're left with no other choice.
Right. How's this going to affect Abbas and the PA in the West Bank? Has the rug been pulled from underneath their feet? And is the momentum politically with Hamas now in terms of Palestinian support?
Well, therein lies the irony, is that the hard-line position by the Israeli military against the protesters in Gaza puts Abbas in a very difficult position. Right. And you're the one partner that you could potentially negotiate a peace deal, two-state solution, where you can finally give the Palestinians an opportunity to live in their own state and live in dignity, could potentially be undermined by these actions.
Okay. TRT World's defense analyst, Oubai Shahbandar, thanks so much.